Hello and welcome to another episode of News of the Week. Now, if you paid attention to the news, you probably heard all kinds of stuff that we talked about last week already about the debt ceiling and finding a compromise and avoiding default and all of that stuff. So that hasn't really changed, and I don't want to spend another video just on that. So I picked something else because I'm assuming a lot of the viewers and listeners are people in the investing space, especially like where we are in the real estate investing space. And I wanted to address something that has been going on in the media basically since the end of last year and early into this year, because there was so much and is still a lot of talk about recession, the economy slowing down, employment slowing down, and so forth. And those so-called economists and experts and pundits were oftentimes asked and are still being asked, what are the consequences for people, working class people? And I also want to shine a little bit of a light on what are the consequences for investors, especially real estate investors. And one thing, if you actually looked at that you might be surprised about, and I have been, in a sense, predicting it before, but a lot of people are surprised that the housing market, the real estate market, has not been behaved as a lot of these so-called experts have claimed it would. What do I mean by that? First, a lot of people said in 2022 and early 2023, the Federal Reserve has increased interest rates so much that it makes mortgages really expensive. And that is true. And therefore, one would think, okay, well, because mortgages are so expensive, there would be no more demand for real estate. And in a normal supply and demand situation, if there's less demand, prices go down. Well, that would have been, in general economic theory, correct. But you always, in any case where you actually try to analyze the situation, have to look at all the variables and not just at one. So what these so-called experts have done over and over and over and tell us in the news is that just because the mortgage interest rates have gone from like 3% or so to now 6.5%, in some cases above 7%, it will destroy demand. And there is some truth to that. Now, here is why hasn't the market really reacted? Number one, think about the situation. You have a family and you have basically in the last year or two had some kids coming into your family, and you live in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, townhouse or small house or something like that. And you might say, okay, well, it would be really great if we could get a 3 or 4-bedroom house now that we have 1 or 2 kids. But when you look at your current situation, you probably, if you were somewhat reasonable, have probably locked in your 30-year mortgage a year or 2 or 3 or maybe more ago around 3%, right? So your payment will be reasonable. You may have actually seen a few increases in your salary and you have gotten used to that payment. Now, let's say you have $150,000 or $200,000 property and you want to go out and find a 3 or 4-bedroom property that's $250,000. Now, you could say, maybe I saved extra money so I can compensate those $50,000 difference in a higher down payment. But the one thing you cannot compensate is if you right now have 3% mortgage interest and you would have to pay 6.5% mortgage interest, that's twice as much in interest alone. And if the place that you are currently living in has not been lived in by you for like almost 10 years, then in your payment that you're paying right now, the vast majority of that is interest and only a small portion is principal. So switching to another property, the payment will go up massively. And yes, you get a little more space, but you're giving up your currently relatively low interest mortgage. So that's one thing why people hesitate to sell their place, because it would be so much more expensive to get another place a little bigger because of the higher interest rate. Now, the other part about it is also that people are actually asking themselves, do I really get the better property? And that is one of the variables that these so-called experts really actually look at. And that is, if you look even before the pandemic, but all the way through the pandemic, so basically even before 2020, but also in the last couple of years, there has been a massive shortfall in inventory. If you ask yourself, why did the prices go up so much in 2019, 2020, 2021, and early 2022? Because there were so few houses to buy and so many people who want to buy them as long as interest rates were really low. Well, now interest rates are high, but the amount of houses available has not really gone up very much. Number one, because during the pandemic, it was extremely hard to build anything. And before the pandemic, a lot of the builders had gone out of the market and had basically gone bankrupt due to the financial crisis. And all the new laws that the federal government and the states have put on in an attempt to try to avoid that this kind of financial real estate crisis can happen again. And as often happens, the pendulum was probably too lenient, too easy for anybody who wanted to get a mortgage and get a house. But the reaction, in my opinion, very American way, is to take the pendulum not to the middle or maybe slightly over the middle, but all the way to the other side. So there is millions and millions and millions of property shortage in townhouses, in duplexes, in single-family homes that already existed well before the pandemic and well before the Federal Reserve ever started increasing interest rates. And that's really the situation that hasn't changed. If there is generally high demand and very little supply in properties, and the population keeps growing, which is the case in the United States, you don't really generate a situation where demand is completely gone. The reason that prices have stayed up pretty well in most places, except for the ones that were extremely highly expensive, but all the average places have stayed up, and there is still in some cases some bidding wars on getting a property. The main reason for that is that there are still way more people who would generally be interested to find a house or a new home and not enough inventory. And now the issue is, if you say, well, why don't these builders that are still around, why don't they catch up and increase the inventory? Well, it's not just for you as a buyer who would have to pay the higher interest rate. The builders have to pay the higher interest rates too. For their construction loans, they have to pay more for the building materials. And there is a risk that the properties that they can build right now, new build properties, would be so expensive that when you add the high interest on top of it, there's barely anybody out there who can afford it. That's why it makes them very careful to build new inventory in large amounts, because they are just as aware as you and I that when the price per month, which is really the decision for anything very, very big that we are getting involved with, is too high. This applies to a home. When you want to buy a home and you have a certain budget that you can afford, you can't really go over that. It also applies for other things, like, for example, a car. People don't buy a car because it's $40 or $50 or $60,000. They look at how much does it cost me per month. And the same is true when you look at housing. How much does it cost me per month? And the same is true for many other things when you look into your entertainment. If you want to have all these streaming services, you ask yourself, how much does it cost me per month? And that question, how much does it cost me per month, keeps people in their current homes with their low interest rates. And that's also the reason, if very little is moving in the market, prices don't come down, which is one thing that a lot of these experts have said. So for me, in a sense, and I'm bringing this up in this news of the week because the data just came out, and we're showing you some of the data here in this video that actually shows that people are hesitant to buy different properties, whether they're new or renovated, because of the high monthly cost. And that's why the market hasn't collapsed. I don't believe it will collapse. It might go down a little bit, but as soon as interest rates go down again, there will be high demand again, because people have been waiting to be able to upgrade and get into bigger homes. So that's basically my news. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up and a like. And if you listen to this as a podcast episode, then please give us a comment and let us know what other topics you like to be addressed. So be well, stay safe, and I'll talk to you next week.